Alright, Snuffs, now we're ready to go live. Alright, so we're going to take a step back today in order for us to take 3 steps forward. Okay? So we're going to actually go back an entire chapter today. Okay? So we are in chapter 5, but we're going to go back to chapter 4 for one day. Okay? We're going to do that today. Tomorrow, you guys are going to take a quiz. Okay? You're going to take a quiz on all of chapter 5 so far. Today won't be on it. Okay? But everything else from chapter 5 will be on that. Which means tomorrow, if you are dividing either synthetically or long division, and you get a remainder, you should probably put a plus in between your remainder and your constant.
Do you ever put a minus?
If the remainder is negative, yes, but then you got to unnegate the negative of the remainder. You know what I mean?
Yeah, put it
Okay. What? No, so then Wednesday, we will start section 5.6. Then Thursday, I think we'll take a test. Okay?
We don't have school.
About time you guys pick up on actually what I'm saying. So Thursday and Friday you're off. Okay? Alright?
I was about to say, I got too much stuff going on this week.
Friday we'll take a formative. You know, we can come in and take a formative. Okay? But no, then Monday we'll pick back up on section 5.6. So I'm still tentatively planning on the 7th of November, the Tuesday. You can have a note card, yes, on the quiz. Correct.
On Wednesday.
Tomorrow.
Oh, tomorrow.
The quiz is tomorrow. Yes.
Quiz tomorrow.
Okay. Alright, so complex numbers today. Here is what a complex number looks like. A plus bi. Okay? That is a complex number. A complex number is made up of 2 parts. Okay? The 2 parts are a complex number has a real part and it has an imaginary part. A real number has a real part and no imaginary part. An imaginary number has no real part and an imaginary part. A complex number has both a real and an imaginary part. Okay? So here's 3 examples of the 3 different types of numbers. So a complex number would be like 3 plus 2i. A real number like 6 would be written as 6 plus 0i if we had to write it in complex form. An imaginary number like 2i would be written as 0 plus 2i in complex form. OCD kicked in there a little bit. Through all of it, you can add complex numbers, you can subtract complex numbers, you can multiply complex numbers, you can divide complex numbers, and you've done all of that. You did it last year in Algebra 2. Right? Right? But through all of that, there is one bedrock foundation that we live by with imaginary and complex numbers. And that is I squared is -1. Sometimes you might see that bedrock foundation core principle be written as I is equal to the square root of negative. Hiccups all of a sudden. Yep. Yeah, buddy. Me and the internet peeps. Okay? With me? Here we go. Simplify the following using I. Square root of negative 49. If Christina typed in the square root of negative 49 on her pretty pink calculator that she has sitting on her desk, she would get on her pretty pink calculator something called domain error. Because it just doesn't work. Okay? There's not there's not one single solitary number that I can multiply by itself and get negative 49. Because a negative times a negative is a positive times a positive is a positive, and a negative times a negative means I'm not multiplying by the same number. So did I say negative times negative?
Yeah.
My bad. Negative times a positive says I'm not multiplying by the same number. Okay? See? Okay? So we need to go to imaginary land to figure that out. Okay? So how I would go about simplifying these is I first factor out the square root of negative 1. So that leaves me with positive now 49. And taking the square root of that. Okay. The square root of negative 1 is I. The square root of 49 is 7. So the square root of negative 49 is equal to 7i. Okay? Questions? You try. Letter B. So here I would go 2 times the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 16 times the square root of 2. Okay? All told, negative 1 times 16 times 2 gives me negative 32. So I've got that. But why did I choose 16 and 2 there? 16 is a perfect square. Okay? And it's the biggest perfect square that goes into 32. Okay? So this one becomes I. This one becomes 4. So in the end, 2, tap the brakes, 2 times the square root of negative 32 simplifies to be 8i times the square root of 2. The 8 came from the 2 times the 4. Because they're both outside, so they are free. Insides, they're not. Using your math skills, solve me x squared plus 6 equals 0. So you did what? First, subtract the 6. So then that gave me x squared equals negative 6. Then you can square root both sides. So the left side's going to give me x. The right side is going to give me what? What's the left or the right side going to give me? I square root 6? But how many answers do I need for this problem? Plus or minus, because we're square rooting and we're solving, we're going to go plus or minus here, negative 1 times the square root of 6. So then that becomes plus or minus I times the square root of 6. As my two zeros, my solutions, my roots, my answers, if you will. Okay? So what does this mean? What happens when we graph this function? Well, if I were to graph this function, it would look like that. Okay? And zeros, solutions, answers, if you will, to a function are where the function crosses the x-intercept, right? They're or not where it crosses the x-intercept, where it crosses the x-axis. They are x-intercepts. This function does not cross the x-axis. So we need to come up with a solution. Because the degree is 2, we got to have 2 answers. They just happen to be imaginary answers. Okay? So, solve that equation for me, please. What'd you do first? What do we do first? Andrew, what do you got? What are you going to add? 9x squared first? Okay, right? Yeah. That's okay. Other Andrew, what would you do first? Yeah. Well, that's not what you were saying, though. Or so subtract 7 from both sides at the same time, right? I like it. So then that gives me 12x squared equals negative 3. Correct? I like it. Now what? Divide both sides by 12. So that gives me x here equals negative, x squared equals negative 1/4. Now what? Square root both sides? Left side gives me what? Right side gives me what? Plus or minus is where we start because we're solving. Square root of negative 1. And then the square root of 1/4, right? Okay. How do I take the square root of a fraction? What do we come up with? How do we take the square root of a fraction? Nope. Even easier than putting it into a decimal. Yeah, it really is. What? Can't reduce the fraction. It's already reduced. No, I don't know what you're. I don't What's your spitball?
That's what.
NASCAR.
Square that denominator.
No. Alright, so we gotta come up with a different way then. Alright? So, Hufflepuff. Hook me up. Square root of 1/4. Maybe that will help us.
It's 1/2.
It's 1/2. Okay? So, how can I get 1/2 out of the square root of 1/4? No.
Take the square root of your denominator. So take the square root of 4.
No. No. I'm square rooting. How do we take the square root of a fraction? What? Square root what? So how do I do it? Stumble up again. What did you get again? 1/2. What if this were the square root of 9/4? Which is otherwise known as 3/2, right? What if it's the square root of 4/9? It's what? 2/3. What if it's the square root of 25/16? How do I take the square root of a fraction? Say it louder, Tim. Okay, we'll wait here then.
You got it right.
Tim, say it louder, please. Swear to God, or I'll drop a weight on your foot.
Take the square root of the numerator and the denominator.
You take the square root of the numerator and the denominator. Okay, so you take the square root of the top and the square root of the bottom. So this becomes the square root of 1 over the square root of 4. What's the square root of 1? 1. What's the square root of 4? 2. So that becomes 1/2. This one becomes I, and the plus or minus comes along for the ride. So in the end here, x is equal to plus or minus I over 2. I would also accept there plus or minus 1/2 I. They all mean the same thing. Okay? Or are you confused on how I got plus or minus I over 2? Find all the zeros of that polynomial function. So like what we were doing last week. Okay. Given f of x equals 2x cubed minus 9x squared plus 10x minus 24 if x minus 4 is a factor. Go. So what do we do first? What? Okay, so how do I set up the synthetic divisions? How'd you get the 4? So you took this and found that 0, right? Right? Okay. So how does that help me towards the solving this whole problem? Other than it sets up my synthetic division. That's one of my 3 answers. Okay? So put a mental note by that one, because that's one of my 3 answers. Okay? So then now we got to set up our synthetic division. So there's my 4, and then I got to do this, and then I got to do 2 and negative 9 and positive 10 and negative 24. And then I drop it like it's hot. Multiply, add, multiply, add, multiply, add, and I get 0. Okay? Which I should have, because it said that x minus 4 is a factor, so that means 4 is a 0. I should get a remainder of 0. So f of x then can now become or be written as x minus 4, because that's the factor, 2x squared minus x plus 6. Was anybody able to factor 2x squared minus x plus 6?
2x plus 3 and then x minus 2.
No. Negative 3 times positive 2 is negative 6, not positive 6. Still the same thing. Get plus 3 and plus 2, then the middles don't work out. It can't be factored. Okay. It can't be factored. Okay. It was a trick question. Okay. So x minus 4 equals 0. That gets me x equals 4, which is the one that we already found. There's one answer. 2x squared minus x plus 6 equals 0. So that means then that now I've got to go to my all-time faves. Opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So that's going to be x equals the opposite of negative 1 plus or minus the square root of negative 1 squared minus 4 times 2 times 6 all over 2 times 2. That is negative of negative 1 is positive 1 plus or minus the square root of 1 minus 48 all over 4, which is 1 plus minus the square root of negative 47 all over 4, which is 1 plus or minus I times the square root of 47 all over 4. So my 3 answers for this problem are 4, 1 plus I times the square root of 47 all over 4, and 1 minus I times the square root of 47 all over 4. OCD. Yeah. Homework this evening. This stuff, this 4.6 stuff, is not on the quiz tomorrow. Okay? It's everything on chapter 5 so far.